Hello and welcome back to the podcast. As always, up to speed with Formula One. It is Friday, February 18th, 2022. I almost said October. I'm living in a time warp, but the good thing is that I'm not living in a time warp. It actually is Friday. That means weekend is here. We're 1 week closer to the start of the 2022 Formula One World Championship. But before we get to that, time to welcome my friend and co-host, Mr. Mark Hamilton. Cammy, how's it going this week?
My friend, thank you for having me. My internship continues for another week. Maybe eventually you'll finally sign me up to a permanent contract. I won't be on this week-to-week basis getting these 10-day contracts as I've been for the last 18 months.
I'll send the official napkin contract over because we're pretty relaxed here, but
I will take it. I will take a napkin contract. My friend, I'm fantastic. I was going to joke that it's been a quiet week in the world of Formula One news, but
quiet, right?
The honest fact is it's been nothing but, and I was a little bit worried coming into this week that we would end up talking a lot about the Super Bowl and the halftime show, but we ain't got no time for those shenanigans because there's been so much, despite the fact that, hey, it's been a big week for car launches and we're just a couple of hours away now from the Mercedes launch. And anyone listening at home on Friday, you'll now know what that car looks like. We've had some fantastic car reveals, and it was like somebody had said on the Spaces chat tonight, I think, Peter, we've kind of had this crescendo that's been building and building. And as the car launch periods gotten farther and farther along, it's just gotten better and better and better. And it really culminated today with that fantastic Ferrari launch. But aside from that, there's all sorts of other news happening. But I'm doing well. How are you? How's the family?
Yeah, everything's good. You know, we've all been a little bit under the weather this week, but we're sort of perking up. We're getting back to normal right as the weekend comes in, and it's Family Day here in BC on Monday, so that means we have a long weekend to look forward to. So to get back to normal, this is exactly the right time. But you said so nicely that that things have been peaking and crescendoing. The only thing better than the launch of that new beautiful Ferrari, which we'll talk about in a moment, must be the debut of the beautiful new Hamilton studio, which you're not flexing at all. I mean, it looks good. You're back where you are. Welcome home. Let's just say welcome home. It looks good. It looks good.
I appreciate it. So it's not done, but I wanted to give a little bit of shine. So the vision will be long-term. I finally get the acoustic panels up. I've got a brand new mic here that's arrived. I haven't set it up yet, but I think the vision is I'll probably have a proper camera on a tripod and some good lighting. Got the backdrop, some F1 memorabilia, have some video playing in the background from my face if you're watching the live stream. That's a bit of a joke, but that aside, thank you very much. It's good to be back in the basement, back in the studio after a couple of months, but thanks for the shout out. And of course, the wallpaper is the exact same that you have on your bedroom, which I only know because you posted the photo on Twitter, but I was super excited that I thought I'd found a super unique wallpaper that no one had seen. And turns out your bedroom wall is adorned with it.
Well, I think more to the point that that our wives have some like unspoken mental connection,
Yes.
because we both know where the like who has the taste in both of these
It was
families.
not me. It
It's
was not me.
definitely not me when it comes to these sorts of things. But it's looking good. It's looking good. I can't wait till it's done. And now that things are looking up, I mean, we will be able to start recording together again in person really, really soon, which is going to be exciting. And looking forward to that. But man, where do we start with the news for this week? There is just so much going on.
Can I ask
feel
a favor?
no, but go ahead.
So here's what we did. So we had a fantastic Spaces chat tonight. And obviously there was all sorts of news, but what we decided to do in the Spaces chat, and maybe we can do the same here, is, hey, let's talk about the new cars first. It's good news. It's fun. I think there'll be some consensus between the two of us that all of these cars look great. And then we can get into the heavy lifting that is the FIA and Michael Masi, etc. But if you're cool with it, I would really love to start with the cars, and I'm dying because you and I haven't spoken all week. I don't even know what you think of the Ferrari other than the comment you just made, but I would love to really dive into the cars as we've seen them this week. We started AlphaTauri on February 14th. They dropped some digital renders on the 15th. Williams, interestingly, showed some digital renders and then hours later took the actual car to Silverstone for some filming day adventures. Then Ferrari dropped yesterday, and then Ferrari dropped today, and then Mercedes is going to drop tomorrow. From what you've seen this week, the AlphaTauri, the Williams, the Ferrari, would love your initial impressions.
Well, I love the livery for the AlphaTauri. I think it looks really sleek, but again, just like the big Red Bull team, they just dropped it onto one of the mock-ups, so we don't actually know what the real car is going to look like. So I mean, it looks good from what we've seen, but we've seen with the teams that have actually revealed the true contender, the real McCoy. They look a lot different subtly, but they do look a lot different than those than the mock-ups that Red Bull's been using. The Williams, I love the color combos that they've used. So this two-tone blue with a hint of red on it, and of course a bit of the white trim, and for the sponsors, I think looks good. The line on the car looks fantastic. It looks like a really really good car. I guess what ultimately what really counts is, does it drive as good as it looks? And I'm really hoping, for somebody that grew up as a kid cheering for Williams when they were in their heyday, this is a team that I have a soft spot for. I'm hoping that this is the year that they start climbing back up through the race order. But I love how they teased us. First of all, was it the end of last week or beginning this week, with Nikki and Alex? Kind of, they got a look at the livery for the car, and they kind of teased it. And I think Nikki used the same term that he used last year. It looks really fresh, but I think this year he said he meant it, or something like that. Um, but just joking aside, I think the Williams looks good, but the Ferrari I think has to be the car that I like the most so far. I mean, it looks sleek. It's got a great line. They've gone back to more of that scarlet. They seem to have, now that they've formally parted ways from whatever guys Philip Morris is taking, and now those Marlboro colors. It looks like they've kind of ditched that orangey tint that they've had in the red for so many years. But the Ferrari, I think it looks wonderful. I mean, at Mugello a couple of years ago, they had like that almost that blood red scarlet for the red that they had. That was like a real throwback to like their very very first days in Formula One 70 years ago or whatever it was. But this, I think, is just the colors look good, the black and the red. The car itself looks good, and I'm excited to see how this one does on the track.
Yeah, I share some of your opinions. I think it's probably too early to pass too much judgment on the Alpha
Sure.
Tower because really all we're seeing is renders. I really did like the color scheme they brought to the track last year. Unfortunately, with the wheel
Mhm.
covers this year, we're not going to get the white wheels. And I think
Yeah.
big 18-inch matte wheels in white would have looked spectacular, but it's probably a little bit too early to pass judgment on the design philosophy and the aero surfaces. I like you, I kind of grew up in the ecosystem that was the Williams support system, simply because Williams were such a big part of British culture in the 80s and the 90s. And,
Sure.
and they
Yeah.
were obviously very successful. And Jacques Villeneuve won a title as a Canadian in 1997. So obviously you and I have a lot of linkages to that team. I think since they departed with Martini, they obviously had that splendid Martini livery for a couple of years in the
Yeah,
middle
that was
of
great.
the turbo hybrid era that looked absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, I think the last couple of years, their design language has really been informed by their sponsors. And I think they had less influence over what the car looked like. I was hoping for more. And I mean, I'm relieved that they've leaned into a shade of blue that's synonymous with Williams. I'm very
Mhm.
happy that they've kept the FW branding because, of course, that's a linkage to the Williams family. So this is the FW44. I thought the car could have been more spectacular. I think it could have been a little bit more unique, but it's conservative, it's cautious, it's not ugly, but it's also not sensational in the way that the Ferrari is. I think there's some very neat aerodynamic elements to this car. And I think we learned some interesting things this week that, hey, it's going to go with a 3-element front wing, which I think is the first car that we've seen so far to do that. All of the other cars have a 4-element front wing, which is kind of interesting. Obviously, it's got that Mercedes power unit. For the first time, Williams is actually going to rely on a Mercedes gearbox. So they've always insisted on building their own. And then, of course, Williams as well, interestingly, have decided that they're going to build their own front and rear suspension, unlike the Aston Martin team, which is borrowing the gearbox from Mercedes, but also taking their rear suspension. So I think the Williams is okay, but it's not sensational. The Ferrari is, and I'm not saying this just because they ditched the Mission Winnow livery. Oh my God, it is sensational. And it's that
Gorgeous.
matte, and Charlie brought this up in the live chat or in the Spaces chat earlier tonight. They've gone with a matte paint. They've dropped the extra weight associated with that clear coat. It looks absolutely sensational. Now, it's rumored that talking today isn't necessarily the front nose that's going to show up in Barcelona and Bahrain, meaning that, hey, they've probably got something a little bit different on tap. I love the fact that, like the Aston Martin, it's got the louvers along the side. I love the top of the side pod and the fact that it caves in on top of itself. I love how wide the side pods are. Everything about this car is absolutely sensational. And based only on having seen these cars in photos so far, my money is on Ferrari to win a championship this year. They deserve it just based on the design of this car. And obviously next week, hopefully we'll have a special guest on that's going to help us dive into the aero philosophy of some of these cars and help us unpack some of the design elements of them. But of the 3 cars that we've seen this week, the Ferrari is sensational. And I didn't think anyone was going to upset Aston Martin. I thought Aston Martin was going to go into winter testing as the absolute crown of the 2022 design challenge. But that Ferrari, man, and I keep going back to this word, is simply sensational. And it looks fantastic with those big 18-inch wheel covers, the floor, the side pods, the louvers, everything about this is just menacing. And if there's anything to be said for their design, the aero philosophy is incredibly aggressive, which tells me that they have supreme confidence in the power unit that they're going to be bringing. I got to think that this car is going to be a threat from the first race weekend of the year.
Yeah, well, I really hope so. And, I couldn't help but think when we just started talking here, Mark, that if you go back now to, I'm guessing, was it late 2017, early 2018, when they first floated this idea for this new era, this new design philosophy for the Formula One cars, I couldn't help but think that when they came out with those renderings, is this what this is going to look like? And of course, fast forward several years and one pandemic later, here we are. And I must say that now that I've seen these cars in reality, that it's really, really exciting. And this is only, but it's also at the same time, it's a very big tease because we're only halfway there. We've seen them, but we still need to see them get onto the track. So that's going to be the next thing that we're going to see. And that's why I guess it's a double tease, because when they first take to the track at Barcelona at the shakedown in a couple of weeks, we're not really going to get a chance to really find out too much until I mean, I'm sure a little bit will leak out once once the drivers get into them, but I don't think there's going to be any big reveals or any big epiphanies or this big enlightening moment after this Barcelona shakedown. I think that it's just a chance for everybody to get familiar with them, find out maybe how these cars behave in reality rather than in the wind tunnel, in the simulator, and well, basically everywhere else than actual three-dimensional reality that we're all living and breathing and walking around in. So it's so close, but at the same time so far. But yeah, it's exciting, and I'm just blown away by all the cars that we've seen so far. That's why it's a bit of a letdown that Red Bull and both their forms are kind of still holding back on us, and I'm really looking forward to see what when those cars really roll out, both the Red Bull and the AlphaTauri, what those final versions look like.
I definitely don't want to be a damp towel because I think I was getting away from myself a little bit in the Spaces chat tonight as I started circling certain dates on the calendar. And I think you're right. I think when we get to Barcelona, that is absolutely a mechanical shakedown for these teams. Some of these teams will have had filming days. We know Aston Martin has, we know Williams has. It's believed that Red Bull has it. It's now understood that they've been to Silverstone. They just didn't publicize it because there's a couple of leaked photos that came out over the course of the last 48 hours. But I think for a lot of these teams, they get to Barcelona, it's going to be a shakedown. I was excited to get to Bahrain because that's real winter testing. And the sense I got was we should have a better idea of what these cars are capable of. But Marshall in the Spaces chat tonight was very, very quick to remind us that if ever there's been a time for sandbagging and putting out deceiving performances, it's probably going to be there. So realistically, we probably won't really know who's kind of nailed the design formula until we get to free practice 1, 2, and 3 a month from now in Bahrain. So we certainly aren't going to know anything coming out of Barcelona. We're probably not going to know a lot coming out of Bahrain. We probably really won't know a lot until that first Grand Prix weekend. And the other thing too, which I kind of dawned upon me earlier tonight is, we've got the Mercedes launch tomorrow. And then on the 21st, we've got Alpine. I'm excited to see that because I'm excited to see how they integrate BWT and the pink coloring into that livery. The Alfa Romeo car launch isn't actually until the week after
It's
The
like the
Barcelona
27th or
shakedown.
something.
Yeah, the 27th. So incredibly, they're going to be rocking a car in camouflage at that event because they won't even be ready to show us what the livery looks like. So it shows how much value some of these teams are putting into Barcelona.
I wonder if they're going to show up with the zebra stripes that we've seen the cars put on before. You know how they have like this
Definitely.
real. It's the black and the white and this really angular, jagged paint job on it because it takes away some of the depth on the cars. So we all know that teams employ cameramen to go out there and take pictures. So you have all these photographers out there trying to take pictures of the cars, and putting these zebra stripes on there just helps disguise the actual the shape and size of things like that, so it makes it a little bit harder to analyze the actual features on it. So it'd be kind of
Do
cool.
you,
Plus it looks pretty wicked,
do
in
you
my
I so I want you to lead into the next subject, but do you
Oh,
mind
okay.
if I tease the next subject?
Sure, because we're going to go into a break, so now's the perfect time to
Perfect,
tease. So
perfect.
tease
So
on.
I'm going to tease this. So today, while we are all relishing in and absorbing and digesting that fantastic Ferrari launch when we probably
Mhm.
all should have been working, the FIA dropped a bomb, and we'll get to that after this break.
All right, very good. And with that, take
I'm
it
a
away.
pro.
Yeah. Hey, man, if you want to do that part, by all means, go for it. Anyways, we're going to take a short break for a quick word from our sponsors. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the show. And yes, we've been teasing, but before we get into the discussion, that I'm actually surprised that this news broke as that, actually in 2022, let alone before the season started. We'll get that into a moment. But talk about dropping bombs. Should we talk about the Super Bowl halftime show? Because I know that was something that's been on our radar for a long, long time since it was first announced. When was it? Last spring, last summer, last. It seems like a long time. But what did you think? I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, so I agree 100%. I loved every minute of it, but it's funny because I think in the past a lot of my criticism of the Super Bowl halftime shows is that the musical talent that's trotted out is typically for an older generation. It's for the generation that was born in the 70s or grew up in the 80s. And when we were watching it this weekend, it was fantastic. And I kept thinking that it's fantastic that they're playing these modern contemporary artists that are really with it and really
Mhm.
key to modern popular culture. And it wasn't until I was scrolling through social media later that it dawned upon me that we are now that older audience, that older demographic that they were appealing to with artists that were really in their prime 20 or 25 years ago. So it was fantastic. But if nothing else, it just reinforced to me how old I am. But I thought the individual performances were great.
Yeah.
I certainly thought 50 was great. Dre on the piano was fantastic. Snoop, as always, he's absolutely a master of live performances. M was brilliant. I loved his kicks. Everything about it was fantastic, other than the fact that it reminded me of the fact that I am now well into my 40s. What about you?
Well, all of the above. So the less we say about the last part about being well into our 40s, probably the better. But yeah, I mean, sometimes these halftime shows can be really disappointing, or maybe not disappointing, but underwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I think that they picked a great lineup. I think they all delivered, and I loved every moment of it. And I was just thinking, every year when the Super Bowl comes on, I have to make my obligatory tweet about Left Shark. Do you remember Left Shark?
So can you please? So I didn't get that at the time, and I saw people talking about it this week. So I remember it was a Katy Perry
That's
performance, and that
right.
there was two like state sharks. Can you please explain that to me? I still don't know what Left Shark was.
Yeah, so okay, so yeah, you nailed it. So Katy Perry was the halftime act. What about 5 6 years ago
I
now?
think
I'm
this was
guessing.
like 2013. I think.
Yeah, so it was in it about that time frame. So, anyways, she went out, did her set, and in one part, I can't remember if it was the entire show, but at one point, she was flanked by a pair of dancers in shark costumes. So obviously, there was one on the left hand side, on from TV view, which would have been on Katie's right hand side, and then one on her left hand side. and the left shark was horribly out of sync with everybody else on the entire show. I mean, it was almost comical to the point where it was that this person just really out of sync with what was going on, or were they just doing it on purpose? But
Oh,
it became a
geez.
little bit kind of almost a bit of a meme or a running joke. So every year at the Super Bowl since then, I have to either tweet something about I hope they bring back Left Shark, or I
Well done.
tweet Left Shark GIF, and I think I made the joke at the time of, I said, looks like they forgot about Left Shark, instead they forgot about Dre. But that's my dad joke humor. So anyways, let's move on before I make more dad jokes. And stop rolling your eyes, sir. I can see you. We might not be in the same room, but we're looking at each other through the cameras. Anyways, I'm gonna backpedal as hard as I possibly can, and I'm going to use Michael Masi as the fall guy now, because this is the only way I'm going to salvage
Well, the
things.
FIA sure did. The FIA certainly did.
Before we get into and talk about this ruling, there's two things on that. Number one, as I said in the first segment, I'm surprised that this actually happened so quickly, because they were saying, even just as of a couple of weeks ago, that they probably weren't going to release the findings of this inquiry until basically the first race of the year. So I think most of us were expecting that this announcement was possibly 3 to 4 weeks out still. And number two, I don't know if they just got time zones mixed up or dates mixed up, or they tried to maybe fly in under the radar, because they actually dropped this announcement that they'd made. They'd actually come to a decision, they'd made changes, and they dropped the news right in the middle of the Ferrari car launch. I'm just like, okay, this just seems a little bit suspicious. But let's talk about it, because there's a lot to unpack about this. There's I have well, let's just talk about it, because there's one thing that, like, when it comes to like the transparency issue, that I'm not super crazy about. But let's first of all take a look here. The okay, no, that's all the sprint race stuff. Anyway, so let's just back up. I got There's so many notes here. So anyways, basically the gist of it is that Michael Masi, the race director, who was in the hot seat and has been this hyper focus of this this whole saga, this entire drama since Abu Dhabi, he's out. So he's lost his job as the Formula One race director in part of what is a pretty massive shakeup. And they're going to have this new virtual F1 race control system. So do you want to explain this virtual race control system a little bit more?
Yeah, I think we've all got a lot to learn about this. And you're absolutely right that the FIA and Formula One really have, to your point, either the FIA had done this intentionally, or they have no awareness of what's happening with the commercial Formula One body. Because to drop
Sure.
this story, to drop this news while Ferrari is unveiling their car, is unapologetically ugly. And Domenicali and Chase Carey have to be furious, as should the entire Ferrari organization. But it looks like, as you noted, and there's a couple of pieces to this. Obviously, bottom line, Michael Masi's out. He's not been fired. He's not been terminated. And I'll speculate as to why that's the case in a couple of minutes, but he's no longer a race director for the FIA for Formula One. One of the things that they have introduced here, and they don't directly acknowledge why this is the case, other than the fact that it's a restructuring. It's not a response. They're not apparently being reactive to the outcome of the championship last year. But obviously, Michael Masi's out. The other thing that they're introducing is this new structure, or this new tool called the virtual race control room. So this will be an entirely new tool that will be available to the stewards and the race directors at a Grand Prix weekend. Now, structurally, the virtual race control room will be off-site at an FIA office somewhere. We don't know where yet. Probably Paris, maybe London. It'll be
Sorry to
off-site.
jump in here, but when I hear like
Please.
FIA like offsite, I think of like CIA dark site. I'm thinking that this is gonna be something. It's like the basement in the Pentagon or somewhere like that. Anyways, please continue.
A dark site, absolutely. In some impoverished country somewhere, there is the darkened basement FIA virtual race control room. So wherever it's going to be, new concept virtual race control room, it's going to have all of the feeds from the broadcast networks and plenty more. Now, the
Yeah.
expectation is that there'll be a team staffing it, and they will have real-time access to and data on everything that's happening at the race. They will also be themselves the individual that will be staffing the virtual race control room. They will be absolute subject matter experts when it comes
Cool.
to everything about race regulation. So it's going to be a new team and it's going to be a new concept. So in real-time connection with the FIA F1 race director, of which there's going to be some changes this year, which you'll get to in a couple of minutes. There'll be this team. So they will be tapped directly into the stewards, directly into the FIA race director to provide ongoing oversight of what's happening at the track, to provide more immediate, more concise, and more tactical information and decision-making about what's happening at the track. So that's one of the big changes.
Yeah, and they're gonna have like this alternating race director who will be Eduardo Freitas, and then also former DTM fellow Niels Wittig. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that
Well done.
properly. So they're going to alternate as the race director. But what I like about like this offsite facility is that they're going to be a way. It's offsite is the key, right? And the one thing that, although I thought it made for interesting television viewing, was obviously not the greatest when it came to actually removing or having that sort of that buffer between the people on the pit wall and the race director, because it was interesting to hear like Christian petitioning Michael Masi or Toto. But I mean, you also have like it shouldn't happen, right? I mean, I can see in other sports, like in football, you got the coach on the sideline and he's yammering at the referee or the linesman or whatever it is, right? Or same in soccer, same in hockey. Smaller field of play arena that you get the chance to interact with the officials. But I didn't like the fact that these guys could press a button and be on the be speaking to Michael Masi in real time and trying to influence him or pressure him. And I mean, ultimately, the stewards were separate, but like I say, it made for good TV, but they should be separate. I just didn't like the idea that they could do that, because it's ultimately it reared its ugly head at Abu Dhabi, right? And this is where we are now. I mean, they were bound and forced to make changes because they had to do so. And unfortunately, I think that just by letting it grow and evolve the way that they did slowly over time, that unfortunately it ended the way that they did, and they put themselves in a position that they had to act and they had to make drastic changes, right?
Yeah. The one comment I would add on that one is, well, I think it's wholly inappropriate that the teams had access to the race director in the way that they did and ultimately had the opportunity to lobby him. The fact that they had that access isn't necessarily new. It was more the fact that the FIA and to a degree, Michael Masi allowed them to do that. There was nothing that would ever have stopped them from doing this. And if you flash back to the Charlie days, the race or the team principals and the teams would do this. They would try to get at Charlie, but they could never get past Herbie. Herbie would be the one that would intercept the calls and run interference for Charlie. So unfortunately, and this is where it goes back to, and it just being in the spirit of being human. I know that human nature, when something goes wrong, I think instinctively people need to identify the source or the root cause of what happened, who's to blame, what is to blame. And I think a very large percentage of the Formula One community has zeroed in and locked in on Michael Masi, that the outcome of Abu Dhabi was fundamentally and entirely at the feet of Michael Masi. And that's not fair. Michael Masi made a huge error. He should absolutely have lost his job. But in the spirit of being human, there was a lot of things that enabled that to happen. One was the rule book itself, which is hugely problematic. One is the fact that he absolutely did not have the support network that's necessary to oversee the highest caliber of motorsports in the world. There's all kinds of different pieces. So absolutely, he made an absolutely callous mistake. I don't think, and we've talked about this so many times, I don't think it was nefarious. I don't think it was manufactured. None of those things. I don't think there was a grand scheme or a grand conspiracy, but he needs to own that. The FIA needs to own that. Now, with these decisions, I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting is I don't think, and let's be clear, that the FIA hasn't announced or shared their findings of the investigation into what happened at the conclusion of the championship last year. I also don't think that they ever will, or I don't think they'll ever make it public, which kind of speaks to their issues with transparency. But I think what they've done here is
100%.
indirectly acknowledge that the outcome of Abu Dhabi was a disaster. And when I say indirectly, they have not fired Michael Masi. Let's be clear about this. They have simply announced that they are going to offer him an alternative role within the FIA. So while they fired him in essence, they haven't actually fired him. They don't have to go out and print a statement saying he's fired, because if you do that, you have to provide an explanation for why he's terminated, why he's fired. So they're simply offering him a new role within the FIA. Now, I believe it's a professional courtesy, and it's also to duck the responsibility of taking accountability for what happened. I don't think he'll accept a role with the FIA. I think it's a professional courtesy, and even if he does, I don't think he's going to be in that role very long. I just think, all of this said, the FIA continues to duck the responsibility that should be inherent within the outcome of that championship. I also think, and there was a listener on the Spaces chat tonight named Steve, and he made a really great point, and I'd never thought about this before, that the FIA may have actually already made the decision to move on from Michael Masi before Abu Dhabi. Like, if you look back at the totality of the 2021 championship, we talked endlessly throughout the championship about the quality of the officiating, whether it's track limits or overtaking in corners or the absolutely soggy, oh, no pun intended, the soggy outcome from Belgium in Spa. There was so much of last year that was defined and shaped by the officiating of the sport. So he may already have been on his way out. And then my final thought, and I know I'm starting to ramble, although I think sometimes I do my best work when I'm rambling. The other thought through all of this is the current FIA president was provided with an opportunity, and he himself was provided with a little bit of cover, because he's able to come in, and knowing how the end of the previous championship happened, how the outcome was concluded, he was given cover to make some pretty dramatic and some pretty sweeping changes. In the world of business, though, you got to think that if you're up for a promotion or you're retiring from a position, you want to set your successor up for success. You want to build a structure and put people into roles where they can excel so that your successor can be successful. You know, I look back now more and more on Jean Todt. He left the current FIA president a total mess. Ben inherited a total mess if you look at the totality of what the FIA brings to Formula One at this point. So all of this is good stuff. I don't think there's any bad stuff here. I just would love to have seen a little bit more humility. I would love to have seen a little more accountability. And I don't believe we're ever going to see the report that will detail what their findings were with respect to the final race in the 2021 championship.
Yeah, unfortunately, we probably won't. And I was just thinking too, as you were so nicely running down that, your analysis of all that, that's one thing that they do by moving Michael Masi into another role within the organization, is that if they don't cut him loose, then they kind of keep the sword of Damocles dangling above his head, because if they kick him out of the organization, even if he signs an NDC, who's to say that he just doesn't decide to break rank and break his silence?
Oh, I never thought about that.
Then come completely clean. I mean, now they keep him in there. They give him some fancy high-priced or high-paid job somewhere else, and then they can stay vague about it. Like you say, I mean, they're never going to release their reports, and I mean, it'll stay buried there with like the moon landing conspiracy and all these other bizarre things.
Daly, your hypothesis on this one is even better than mine. Mine was very much, hey, as a professional courtesy, we won't terminate you, but we're going to offer you a short-term gig, and that you're going to politely kind of retire from quickly. But I think yours is even better, which is, hey, look, we're not going to terminate you. We're going to offer you a cushy, meaningless job at the FIA headquarters in Paris. Just stay quiet and accept these nice paychecks for the next 10 years. Oh, I like your hypothesis more.
I love watching spy movies and anything like that. I've watched way too much Homeland and 24 and stuff like that over the years. So, you can see where my thinking's at.
Definitely.
I just wish I had a DB5 like 007 or just basically anything that would make me more like James Bond. Anyways,
it would fit well in the driveway of your lavish estate.
That's right. Anyways, let's take a quick break. When we come back, are we going to still talk about this, or are we going to move on to some other news? Well,
Joe, I think we'll decide. I think just a couple of other quick points. So just to recap everything there, today, the FIA, through President Ben, he had a speech. They're going to introduce the virtual race control room to assist the stewards and the race director. Direct radio communication has been disconnected. They are going to review the unlapping procedures from behind the safety car. And then finally, we have kind of these two folks that are going to work in tandem to function as the race director. So that's to recap everything that we just talked about, because I took us on a weird tangent. Sorry about that.
And my conspiracy tangent wasn't weird enough as well. So anyways, time for a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, well, welcome back to the show. And getting away from things that we can't prove, like conspiracy theories and things like that, one thing that we can prove is that they finally announced which races we're going to see for the sprint races this year. So it's going to be Imola, Austria, and Brazil. And there's going to be some different changes to the format as well, which I think is great. So pole position for the Grand Prix will be awarded to the fastest driver for qualifying on Friday. And then also for the sprint race, they're going to be awarding world championship points for the top 8 finishers as follows. So first gets 8 points, and then sliding down by 1 point. So 8 points for first and 1 point for eighth. So I think that's a good way to do that. And then the cost cap adjustments for the sprint races are going to stay the same as they were last year as well. So I think this is a good idea. That was one of the big I don't want to say controversies, but one of the big talking points from the sprint races when they were trialed last year was, okay, well, who gets credited with the pole? How do they work it around? So I'm glad that they've figured this out before the season now, and they've come up with a structure to work with. And I'm glad that I'm also glad that they've only stuck to 3 races out of what are we having this year? 22, 23. I think keep it to a selective bunch. And when they said like a couple of months ago that they were going to do up to what was it, 6 races, it was like every 2 or 3 races we were going to have a sprint race weekend. And for me, that was just too much. Like I still like the idea of the sprint races. I might not be as jacked up about it as I was prior to the start of last year, but 6 for me would have been too much. And I still enjoy the novelty and the concept of it enough that I don't want to throw it out completely, but I don't want to see it like every other race. So for me, I'd say, yeah, 3 races spread across the width and the breadth of the season 3 times. Sounds about right.
Let's be super clear though. Formula One didn't want 3 sprint weekends. They wanted
Well, they
6,
want
just like
6.
you
Yeah.
indicated. They wanted 6 because they see, and again, let's be clear, Liberty, Formula One, they're all about extracting value from this property. And one of the ways you do that is by pumping up these race weekends. And you
Yep.
can pump up the value of a race weekend by injecting more excitement. And you do that by sticking in something like a sprint qualifying session. So for Formula One, sprint qualifying is important because if I'm selling these events to race organizers, I can sell one of these weekends for more money than I would for a weekend without sprint qualifying. And I could go to the TV networks and get more money from the TV networks because they've got more of a broadcast and they're going to get more eyeballs on the TV. So Formula One was all about 6. The problem is you had 2 teams in Red Bull and Mercedes that would only sign up to 6 sprint weekends if the sport allowed the cost cap to raise by $5 million. Now, all the smaller teams were saying, no, 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 no. We can run 6 sprint weekends without increasing the cap. And they were motivated to do that because A, they didn't believe that there was a necessary cost increase associated with 6 sprint weekends. Because really, when you consider the number of laps that are done during a sprint race, it's not a lot more than you would do in the free practice session you lose. Now, there's a greater risk of damage naturally, but Red Bull and Mercedes were saying, hey, we want to do this, but we want to inject more money into the cap, which would disproportionately benefit them and disproportionately negate the benefits of the increased revenue for all of the other teams. So ultimately, they refused to agree to 6. F1 stepped in, said, hey, we're going to do these 3. And they've introduced a couple of tweaks to make the race weekend a little bit more palatable based on some of the feedback last year. So for me, my thought was always, hey, I am still of the mind that qualifying, I love Friday qualifying. I love nothing more than taking an hour out of the middle of my workday to watch a qualifying session with some colleagues. I still think that qualifying should set the grid for the sprint event and for the Grand Prix. I also don't think it should be called sprint qualifying, and it's not anymore. It's just called the sprint. I think there's still some massaging here to do. I'm just glad that Formula One was open to doing some things. And to your point, I'm not sure, man. I'm not sure if I would have had the appetite for one of these every 3 or 4 race weekends. It's an awful lot when you're talking about an already jam-packed 23 race calendar.
Oh yeah, I mean, how many times are we going to have like double and triple header weekends all season long? I mean, if we were going to have like 6 sprint weekends on top of that, I mean, it seems almost counterintuitive for me to sit here and say, is there a point when there would be too much Formula One? When I looked at the schedule and then the possibility of all these sprint weekends on top of it, I was thinking to myself, yeah, there might be a point in 2022 when I'm thinking there's too much Formula One going on, and this is coming from a guy that's a diehard Formula One fan. So I'm glad that it's kind of shaken out the way that it has, and I'm glad that it's only going to be 3 races. And the other question I have is Brazil going to be like a perpetual sprint weekend like venue? Because they had it last year, they get it this year as well. But whatever. I mean, 3 times over the course of the year. Imola, Austria, and Brazil. That sounds about right. As we said, it would make sense to kind of spread it out geographically, but I'm surprised that maybe one of the Middle Eastern or maybe one of the Asian races didn't get a sprint event. But who knows if that was ever really a discussion.
So, 2 questions for you because I'd love your
Yep.
feedback, or not
Okay.
necessarily your feedback, but I'd love your thoughts on this. One, obviously, we're seeing a shakeup in the way that points are being awarded. So, last
Yep.
year, only the top 3 finishers scored points. It was 3 points, 2 points, 1 point. This year, from the first place to the 8th place, it's 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 point. So, 8 finishers are going to score in the points, which makes these events that much more important and that much more meaty. And the other thing that we learned is that for historical purposes, the pole, the individual that finishes top during the Friday qualifying, not the
Mhm.
person that scores the race win during the sprint qualifying session. So I would love your perspective. Good idea that they're making the race a little juicier with the number of points that are going to be available. And two, do you prefer that pole be awarded for historical record keeping purposes? Do you prefer that pole be awarded for the Friday qualifying session, or should it be for the sprint event like it was last year?
I like the idea that they're going to do it on Friday because even though it's not the qualifying for the race itself, it is qualifying in its own right. So I think that it works. I mean, I like how they're moving away from sprint qualifying, and like you say, they're just calling it the sprint. So sure, I think I'm fine with that. But what I really like now is the fact that they are going to hand out points for the first day 8 finishers in the sprints. And I think that's maybe the way that you make this a little bit more appealing, give the teams more incentive to go out there and do something in this sprint on Saturday. I mean, if the first couple of cars were only going to get points the way that they did it last year, I mean, if you're say a McLaren or a Ferrari or somebody that's not really going to win a race under normal circumstances, I mean, because chances are that, I mean, based on what we've seen the last couple of years, is either going to be Red Bull or Mercedes. So everybody else is going to say, well, we're not going to have a chance to beat any one of those 4 cars from those 2 teams. So why do we really need to go out there and push and fight? But when you throw more points out there for everybody else rather than the first 3 cars or first 3 finishers like they did last year, all of a sudden there's a lot more on the table. There's a lot more to race for. And if you get an interesting battle in the constructors this year, like we've seen over the past couple of years between McLaren and Ferrari, for example, picking up those points, picking up a 5 points or a 4 points or 3 points, whatever it is in these sprint races, over the course of an entire season, that adds up. I mean, if you can bring home 10 points between your 2 cars over those each one of those weekends, I mean, that can make a big difference come the end of the year in the constructors.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is probably more exciting for the smaller teams that will be scrambling to amass constructors' points to try to stack up as much prize money as possible at the end of the season. I love the new point structure. I think it's going to make these events that much more relevant. Now, is it going to make the sprint weekend that much more exciting if it's the first or second month of the season? Maybe not. But when you get down to Brazil and all of a sudden you go into that race weekend and you have 25, 26 points available to a potential race winner. And the fact that, hey, you could score 25 points for taking the win, a point for the fastest lap, and you can stack 8 points on top of that if you win the sprint. That's crazy, man. That's what, 34 points available in a single race weekend. It really
Exactly,
keeps the
right?
championship wide open. And so I'm a big baseball guy, and people that are baseball fans are really big on the history book and the records of Major League Baseball. And a lot of us are really struggling right now to digest the fact that the designated hitter is going to be introduced into the National
Oh,
League, because
National League. Yeah, yeah,
that
yep.
that changes the dynamic of how the record books have functioned in that sport. But I'm a big fan of record books, and I love going back and seeing, hey, how many polls did this driver score, and what were the most polls scored in a season? And last year was a little bit weird because all of a sudden you had these 3 race wins or these 3 race weekends where pole wasn't given for a historical perspective and for a record keeping perspective to the person that triumphed during qualifying itself. It was given to the person that won that sprint qualifying event. So I like this. I just still don't believe that sprint qualifying or the sprint race or the sprint or whatever we're calling it this year. I still don't believe that should set the grid for Saturday. I think that should be exactly what it is, which is an independent mini race. That's what it is. It's a mini race, and it shouldn't be setting the grid for the actual race itself.
Well, the other thing that I like about the fact that they're going to give out points for the first 8 finishers on the Saturday sprint is the fact that these are points that you have to go out and earn. And it's, I mean, sure, I guess you could say it's kind of gimmicky, the whole sprint concept in and of itself, but it's not as bad as like they did a couple of times over the years where they'd have like these double point finishes like for races. I think that the last time they did that was what, 2016 ish.
2014.
Was it 2014? Okay, so I
Yeah.
mean, it's been a while, but I didn't like things like that.
That was terrible.
I thought it was bogus.
I
So I
I
like the
completely
fact.
agree. That was terrible.
Yeah, but like to my original point is I'm glad that they're giving more points out on Saturday to more cars, and I think it's just going to make it a little bit more exciting rather than watching Lewis drive away down into the distance, watching Max following him or vice versa, and the other two, the other Red Bull and the other Mercedes or whoever comes out as the top dog this year. I think it's just going to make, or the potential is there for more exciting racing. So anyways, let's move on to the next one because there's still a ton of things. We're already 45 minutes into this thing here. So what's the next one? Okay, well, yeah, we already talked about that. That was the non-disclosure of their the FIA's investigation into the Abu Dhabi controversy. Yeah, we don't need to talk about that. So that's probably good in the in the grand scheme of things. Where should we go here? Oh, okay. Let's go into a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the soggiest discussion we'll probably have all show long, and that was to reference to your reference about Belgium, because this is the other thing that came out. So we're going to talk about this because we were all over them for that farce last year. Anyways, there's news on that, so let's put it that way. Time for a break. We'll be back in just a moment. Don't go away. Okay, welcome back. So, Formula One and the FIA have confirmed that big revisions to the treatment of short races and all these half points and things like that, that is going to be revamped because that was, like you said, when we were talking about, the whole decision to remove Michael Masi as the race director, and perhaps he was already under the microscope, not just because of what happened in Abu Dhabi, but just the way that things kind of played out over the course of the entire season. And of course, one of those flashpoints was the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. When was that? The end of August, I'm guessing, is typically when it is about third weekend in August. Soggy weekend, bad weekend. I mean, there were crashes in like all weekend long through all the support races as well. It was a torrential downpour. They did the right thing by not running the race because it was just a safety issue. And we saw Lando have a big moment at the top of Eau Rouge, and there was obviously big concern for that. So the only thing was that was really a joke was they toured around behind the safety car, then they went back into the pits, they stayed there for a long time, then they went back out behind the safety car just for what was it, a couple of laps, basically to say that they did something, and then they red flagged it and ended the race and then gave everybody half points, and it was just a real joke. And I mean, there was so much criticism, not just from the from the fans, from the media. I mean, the drivers were critical. I mean, most of them were saying that the fans should be given their money back, or they should be given heavily discounted tickets to come back for 22, all these different things. So that was one of the big things that needed to change. And I mean, we actually got to the point that we decided last year that we were going to round up or down when it came to points, because it just sounded silly to say that Max is leading the championship. He's got 243 points, 3 points ahead of Lewis Hamilton, who has 240.5 points or whatever it was. So I'm glad that they've made this decision. So they said that no points will be awarded unless a minimum of 2 laps have been completed by the leader without a safety car or a virtual safety car intervention. So that bar has been set. It's a pretty low bar, but in the case of Spa last year, when the conditions were that bad, would they have even been able to go out there and complete 2 laps,
No.
even at the lowest speed? And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point of why they came up with this framework.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's crazy that in the context and in the shadow of what we saw at the end of the championship last year, that Spa itself has been forgotten, and you and me and the entire F1 community, and like you said, the drivers and the teams were so up in arms about the outcome of that race. And to set everyone back, Spa, torrential rain all weekend. Lando had that scary incident at the top of Eau Rouge. There was a really scary incident during the W Series support
Yep.
race. We go into the race weekend. They do 3 laps. They do 3 formation laps. They come into the pits. They're there for an eternity. They come out, and ultimately, the drivers do 2 laps behind a safety car. So there is never a racing lap. They do 2 laps behind the safety car, which is just enough. That is the bare minimum to get a race classified. Bam, the race is over. They award half points. Everyone goes home. So for all
Mhm.
the fans that have been sitting there watching the spectacle for hours and hours and hours, they're upset. What is this? Why are these drivers being awarded points? They haven't completed a racing lap. And for the drivers, they're equally as upset. And for everybody that went to Spa that weekend, they don't get a refund because the race isn't canceled, because it
Yeah.
gets classified. And at the time, everyone was speculating that, hey, look, the FIA, Formula One, they knew it was never going to be safe enough to complete a racing lap. So they paraded everybody out there. And this is where that term a farce came up. So they paraded everyone out there behind the safety car, knowing that they were never going to complete a racing lap, but they paraded them out there because they wanted to get the race in the books, and they could get it in the books and they could get it classified by completing 2 laps behind the safety car. So now that is never going to happen. And I'm reading here from gpfans.com. After the completion of 2 recognized racing laps, but in the event of less than a 25% distance being achieved, the top 5 drivers will be awarded points. The winner will score 6, the runner-up 4, with further deductions to the 5th place driver, who would score 1. If 25% is completed but less than 50%, the following points will be applied: first 13, second 10, third 8, fourth 6, fifth 5, sixth 4, seventh 3, eighth 2, ninth 1. For races where above 50% but less than 75% is completed, the points would increase again. First from 13 to 19, second from 10 to 14, third from 8 to 12, and so on and so forth. So this is a fairer way of making sure that we don't see a
Yep.
farce like what we saw in Spa last year. That they are saying that, look, unless they can complete a certain bare minimum of racing laps, so those are laps where the virtual safety car isn't present or a physical safety car isn't present, there's no way a race is going to get classified. And if the conditions don't allow for a racing lap, the race will be canceled. Because again, you look at the outcome of the race last year, Max Verstappen won that race. He took home half points. If that race had been canceled like it should have been, and that everyone was arguing at the time, Lewis Hamilton wins the championship, even with the outcome in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I know. It's funny though, and it does go to show that over the course of such a long season, how these isolated incidents can have such a huge outcome on the eventual
Absolutely.
result at the end of the year. And that's funny you should mention that, because I never actually thought about that. With all the drama that we saw last year in 21, especially the crescendo and the fallout after Abu Dhabi, I never went back and revisited that. But that is such a great observation, that if those points had not been awarded the way that they were after Spa, then that whole debacle after Abu Dhabi just it doesn't mean anything. Well, I'm yeah. Let's not go down that road. I mean, that's a
And by the
completely
way, I should probably get my math straight, so I'll come back and verify if my comment was accurate, but I think it
okay,
is.
sure.
But it just speaks to the fact that, hey, that really could potentially have been very
Yeah.
influential in the championship.
Yeah. But the other thing is, and obviously, I mean, you could tell my skepticism, my cynicism towards the fact that they aren't going to make the results of that investigation into the Abu Dhabi situation public. But I am as disappointed as I am from that aspect. I am encouraged by the fact that they acted in a lot quicker fashion than I expected, because I was honestly not expecting to see or hear any results for a couple of weeks yet at minimum. But then also some of these other things like the half points. I mean, that became a bit of a running joke on this show after like Spa, right up until the end of the year. So I'm glad that despite I guess you could say the results are somewhat, or the actions are somewhat mixed, but they're acting on things, and hopefully with the new president in place at the FIA, that perhaps this is the first tentative steps into a new era, and they're listening, they're acting upon these things. So I have hope now. Let's put it that way.
And just to clarify my statement prior, in Belgium, Max Verstappen finished first. And of
Yeah.
course, George Russell had that shock second place finish because he qualified well in the rain. And Lewis Hamilton finished third. Half points were awarded, which means that Max Verstappen scored 12 and a half points. Lewis Hamilton scored 7.5 points. That's a 5-point delta. At the end of the season, Max Verstappen won the championship by 8 points. So that 5-point differential wouldn't have made a difference, and Max would have actually still won by 3 points. So humility, which the FIA doesn't love to show, I'm demonstrating what it can look like live on the air.
Oh man, but that's completely against the theme of this show. You could have said that you're going to go back and revisit your calculations, but you're not going to make the results of your inquiry public. So,
I am
you
demoting you to a different undisclosed position within the Scuderia F1 recording studio. I'm
know,
introducing 2 replacements that will alternate week to week.
fair enough. That's I accuse you of being a professional because you handled that way too quickly. I mean, talk about thinking on your feet. Well done.
Yeah, Meg Charlie, I'm calling you live on the air. You are the new co-host. You will take turns week to week.
All right, I got my Thursday nights back. This worked out well again.
uh,
We're talking about a guy that's not going to have as much time on his hands this year's Otmar Szafnauer, former team principal at Force India / Racing Point / Aston Martin Racing, is now the new team principal at Renault / Alpine / Alpine, which that's way too many slashes in there. Anyways, this is something that's when I heard the news, it was kind of as a surprise, but not really, because he was rumored to be going there last year, and then he was obviously let go by Aston Martin not so long ago, and then replaced, and then he pops up at Alpine, who had this bizarre triple-headed monster last year, rather than having a dedicated team principal in the wake of the departure of Cyril Abiteboul, who was the team principal there prior to 2021. And this, I can't help but think that this is just a good hire. This was just logical. I mean, Otmar's far too good of an F1 person to be out of a job for too long. And just looking up and down the pit lane, this just made way too much sense. When you looked at it, or when I looked at it, the question was, how long is this going to take? And the answer was, it didn't take very long.
What's remarkable about this story is you and I were talking about his departure from Aston Martin and his potential arrival at Alpine back on November 12th.
Really?
This was
Wow.
reported 3 months ago, and it took until now to become official. And you're right that Alpine, who themselves have been a revolving door of executives for the better part of the 5, 6, 7 years that they back in Formula One, they went into last year with this bizarre triumvirate of this three, like, I like the way you put it, that three-headed monster of leaders that were going to take control of different parts of the organization. And
It just doesn't
clearly
work in
that
sports.
it really doesn't, like that. The equivalent would be like, look at Major League Baseball. You have a manager, and you maybe have a hitting coach, and you have a batting coach, and then you have a manager, but ultimately there's one individual that's responsible for everything that happens in that dugout. This would be like taking a Major League Baseball team and saying, hey, are going to co-manage this team. It's never going to work.
No.
I have to think though that this is an absolute coup for Alpine, and Alpine CEO Laurent had actually commented a couple of days ago that last year they didn't intend to have that three-headed monster that you spoke of, that it was more an unintended consequence of the departure of their previous team principal. Although, of course, his departure was a byproduct of being fired. So I think maybe they probably should have anticipated this coming. But I think Otmar is an absolute coup for this team. And you need
Yeah.
only reflect back on his time with Force India / Racing Point / Aston to put this into context or a kind of terms or a frame of reference that I think a lot of our North American listeners might be familiar with. Force India was the smallest of small market teams in Formula One. Think about them as the Oakland Athletics or the Sacramento Kings or some small market team that has very little financial resources, but
Mhm.
continues to punch above their weight. I guess the Sacramento Kings aren't really a great example unless you go back to the Mitch Richmond era. But take a look at Oakland Athletics for the better part of the last 25 years. Zero budgets, zero revenues, but they're continually competitive. And that's really what Force India were. They had virtually no financial resources. They had a tiny factory. They had just 400 employees, while some of their competitors had 800, 1,000, 1,200 full-time staff on their roster. This was a man that wore countless hats. He had to be out negotiating sponsorships. He had to be looking after the factory, the aero philosophy. He was doing a little bit of everything. And you and I have speculated in the past about what happened at Aston Martin. And hopefully one day we'll get a better sense of why he didn't stay with that team and why he didn't necessarily mesh with his new boss and with Lawrence Stroll. But I think he's going to have, this is an absolute coup for Alpine. And they made the comment that they expect to be competing for championships within 100 Grand Prix, which is really probably 4.5 seasons. I think he's the right guy to do it. And this is a team that also financially flush with cash right now. And I think Renault, who's obviously the parent organization and is partially state owned in France, I think they continue to look at this project and say, is this worth it for us, especially if we can't be competitive? Because the other way that this team would typically make money is by selling power units to other teams, and they don't have any customer teams right now. Now,
No.
Otmar is incredibly well respected within the sport. Maybe he's able to negotiate an engine supply deal with another team, but ultimately, I think he's absolutely the right person to bring in to right the ship at Alpine.
It's interesting too that you kind of make that small market reference between, say, like the Oakland Athletics and Racing Point, because those are the two teams that Jose Canseco's driven / played for. So there you go. But I'm joking. Another bad joke. But yeah, no, I think that this is a great move by Alpine, and I think I don't want to say it's one final toss of the dice to really nail it and get it going in Formula One. I mean, they've been doing this now since what, 2015 again, since
2015.
they took over Lotus. But I mean, they just really haven't gotten to where I think most of us expected that they would. I mean, they've kind of shown a couple of glimpses here and there, but they've been far and few between. Um, but you know, it's just that, like you say, I mean, when it's a partially state-owned company, and when they're looking at like the bigger picture, it's like, when do they decide that it just isn't worth it for them any longer to keep going and investing in this project? But the thing is that if you get good people in there to run it, and like you say, Otmar is incredibly respected throughout the rest of the pit lane, throughout the paddock, throughout the Formula One world. If anybody's going to turn this thing around, and if anybody's got a good mind to organize this team and point it in the right direction, it's going to be Otmar. And I mean, there isn't anybody else available at the moment with that sort of profile and with that resume than Otmar Szafnauer. So it's certainly going to be interesting. It's just going to be, my big question is, how much time are they going to give him to turn the ship around and point it in the right direction before they decide to either part ways with him, or are they just going to pull the plug and walk away from Formula One? I'm not suggesting that they would do either with great haste. I just kind of wonder where they, where their mindset is with the upper management there. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. And whereabouts are we? Oh, yes. So we are sort of talking about our psychic abilities here. So you apparently have cracked the Netflix algorithm, and you did last week. We were trying to predict when the new drop of season 4 of Drive to Survive will launch. You said March 11th, and they confirmed that season 4 is indeed going to drop on March 11th, which is great. I mean, that's what, 3 weeks from today. So set a reminder in your phone, get it, set that reminder in Netflix so that when you log into your device on that day, you can just get right into it. But yeah, I'm excited. I mean, of course, they pick and choose everything that they want to make it dramatic and exciting. But I mean, there wasn't too much manipulation needed after last year because there were plenty of exciting storylines and different threads to pull on. So I know I'm not alone in saying I'm circling March 11th on my calendar digitally, of course, because who uses a paper calendar anymore? But exciting. And
There's no
congratulations on that prediction, sir.
Yeah, that's one of my strengths is math, and this was a fairly easy calculation, but thank you for that. I gotta say though, what I'm most excited to see is how they address the finale. Like, again, considering that Netflix and Formula One are doing this in partnership, this is a collaboration between the two. And like you said, they're very selective about what's shown, what's discussed, what's aired. I am incredibly eager to see how they address the finale. Are they going to be an open book and look at it with a critical lens and acknowledge what a disaster that was for the sport? Or did they brush over that? I'm incredibly excited to see. So for me, I'm almost going to skip ahead, presumably, to what I'm hoping will be kind of bottled up in that last episode. But episode 10 is the one that I'm most eager to see.
Well, the other thing is that when we do our reaction show to the new season, this year is going to force both of us to sit through like the entire like season, all the
Yeah.
episodes. So yeah, because I know we got right to the end. I think I watched half of the last episode. I can't remember. I think you did something similar, but we have to sit through the entire like it's a bad thing to sit through the
I
entire
know. I
season,
know.
but we set ourselves a bit of an unrealistic time frame. It dropped on a Friday. We were going to do our reaction show on Sunday, which we did, but then we had to cram an entire season worth
Oh,
of
man.
Drive to Survive in between Friday night and Sunday afternoon. But anyways, good stuff nonetheless. And since you've been flexing those psychic powers, now predict me some lottery numbers so I can go and buy a ticket and become ridiculously wealthy. You're looking unsure of yourself there. Is this not
With all due respect, if I could predict lottery ticket winners, I wouldn't be sitting here in this basement gazing up at the mansion of yours up on the hill. So
well, you make it sound like me flying around in my Zeppelin, tossing gold coins out to the people below to be a bad thing, while I'm hanging out
throwing
with my.
them to them or at them.
Yeah, well, that's up to interpretation, but me and my 1% buddies, we like to have a good time. So let's just leave it at that. Probably move on from that comment as quick as possible. So,
Oh, yeah.
next story, Red Bull have another sponsor, and this is in the wake of last week. They announced a new title sponsor in the software company Oracle. So this week they've announced a sponsorship deal with Bybit. So it's getting a little bit kind of much to kind of pronounce, but I guess the official team name is Oracle Red Bull Racing. So anyways, interesting that they're lining up the sponsors. And again, it just goes to show you that there's no lack of corporate interest and desire to get into Formula One and in one way or another and sponsor a team and get your branding, your logo on one of these cars.
I'll give credit to Vincenzo Landino, friend of the show, because one of the things that he's been trumpeting via his social media channels for some time is that cryptocurrency is very much and I'm stealing this phrase from Vincenzo, but cryptocurrency is very much the new tobacco of Formula One, and we can probably expect to see more and more and more of this.
Yeah.
It's going to be a blend of obviously these big corporate enterprise type sponsors, but probably a lot of cryptocurrency as well. And this is a perfect example that Red Bull has secured another sponsorship. This one's worth, like you said, $150 million over 3 years. So you
Big
consider
money.
the fact that they're going to pull in $100 million a year from Oracle, that combined between these two sponsors, they're going to earn $150 million a year, which covers the entire cost cap and then some. Like almost their entire operations are covered by these two sponsors. So it speaks to the benefit of winning in Formula One, because obviously the association with a winning Formula One team provides tremendous value to your organization, but absolutely a financial coup for a team that probably doesn't need it, but has certainly earned it by scoring that drivers' championship last year.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Hey, let's take one quick final timeout. We'll come back and we got a bunch of quick hits here in the news, and we'll do that as we slowly dim the lights. And well, we're already at home, our respective homes, but you know what I mean. Anyways, back in a moment. Don't go away. Okay, well, the first story as we start to tidy things up here and dim the lights is after 27 years, Williams is going to remove the Senna S logo from their 2022 car. It's been on their car ever since, well, the mid 90s, ever since Ayrton tragically lost his life in that accident at Imola back in 1994. So do you want to talk about this one, Mark? What the logic was behind them to remove this?
Yeah, I think the first thing that's probably important to comment on here is that while they'll be removing the acknowledgement of Ayrton Senna from the physical car itself, there will still be a strong legacy and tribute to Senna on the Williams campus. And the Williams campus is well known for its hospitality and its
Yep.
museum of cars. So I think anyone that does visit the campus will absolutely be immersed in of what Ayrton meant to the team and what he meant to Formula One. I think for Doralton and the Williams team, I think it's important for them to be able to continue to advance and evolve this team. And I think they're doing it in a respectful way, knowing that, hey, you know what, we've graced our cars with an acknowledgement to what he meant to the sport for 27 years. But now we're going to find other ways to acknowledge and continue to recognize what he meant to the sport and
Mhm.
to this team, but just in different ways. So not controversial at all. I think it's good, but I also think it speaks to the fact that Doralton is really looking now to put their stamp on this team. And even this week, Yost Capito had made a comment that, look, this is no longer a family run business. This is a world class, well funded engineering operation. And I think this is just another one of those steps to demonstrate that they want to put their imprint on this team while also not dismissing its history and its legacy. And of course, we spoke
Mhm.
earlier about the fact that they're continuing to call the cars the FWs, the Frank Williams. And
Yep.
of course, Ayrton will continue to be honored and recognized, but they'll simply do so on the campus itself.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate, and I'm fine with the way that they're doing it. And you know, I kind of like the way that the new management they're kind of going. They're not kind of. They're going in their own direction, but they're still taking that history and bringing that forward, but they're doing so in their own way. I mean, you know, keep the traditional things like keeping the FW in the name of the car. I think that's great. You know, carry that tradition forward. And like you say, the history that they have to draw on. I mean, ever since Williams came into Formula One, what was it, in 78, 79, something like that. I mean, it's a ridiculously long history that they have, and I mean, they were ridiculously successful in Formula One for quite some time too. And I mean, unfortunately, they haven't been, had much success in a very long time as well. But they have a very, very rich history, and that was the thing. They did take the team over. They did it with the view to obviously run a team. Although when it comes in like they're venture capitalists, aren't they? I mean, I was also kind of wondered, is this perhaps a a short or maybe a medium term investment. Maybe it is. Maybe they're going to flip it to someone else, but maybe in the meantime, or maybe not. Whatever their plans are for the short, long, medium term, whatever it is, that they're going to run it the way that they see fit and run it their own way. And ultimately
You
at this point, I I don't see any issues with the way they're doing with it. Sorry, go ahead.
I think no, I was just gonna say, I think they've done a fantastic job with this team, right? I think when you hear venture capitalists, you oftentimes think, hey, they're gonna strip this down to the nuts and bolts and start
Yes.
selling off
Yeah, yeah,
individual assets to get value in the short term. They've continued to invest in this team and bring
yeah,
in absolute subject matter experts. I'm still of the mind that they may not be the long-term owners. I still think they're potentially a front for a large automotive OEM that might be looking to enter the sport, and that Williams itself may be sold off to that other
yeah,
entity.
yeah.
But I don't have any concrete evidence to suggest that. But in the short term, the medium term, I certainly can't criticize the way that they've run this team. I think they got the team for an absolute song, an absolute bargain when Williams was at a point where they simply ran out of cash and liquidity. And I think they got it for a song, but I cannot criticize what they've done with this team since they've taken control of it.
Yeah, totally. Hey, so sticking with Williams, and this one is a bit sobering. Let's put it this way. But Nicholas Latifi has released or disclosed some of the information about the security that he had to bring on after he got all those threats for the accident that he was involved in Abu Dhabi, which led to the safety car, which led to the debacle, which led to the fact that Lewis lost the championship and Max won it, and all of that. And we said at the time, is just like, you can't fault Nicky for that. He had a moment like every other racing driver in the history of racing has had a moment at one time or another. And why should he be targeted by these wackos, right? Yeah. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that, or because I can't find my notes for it other than I've written.
Yeah,
Anyways, it's a scary thing, and I hate to hear, like I felt bad that right from the very beginning that he felt responsible for influencing the outcome of that race, and I hate to hear even more of that he felt that he needed to have people watching his back, like pros, like guys that are like ex special forces or SWAT team or whatever the heck these guys are, to watch him, because he's legitimately concerned that somebody's going to try and do something stupid, right?
yeah, I completely agree. And ultimately, you and I have been very much of the mind that he was doing what he should have been doing at the moment that the crash happened. And unfortunately, the outcome wasn't desirable, but he was racing for position during a Formula One Grand Prix as a as a professional Formula One race driver. And
He's
the
doing his job.
outcome wasn't 100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
He was doing his job. And it's shocking and it's disturbing that we continue to live in a world where somebody has to lean into private professional security to
Mhm.
ensure during the off season because there's some people that choose to target him, and whether they are absolutely psychologically problematic people who need help, whether they're just angry fans of a driver who didn't benefit from the outcome of this. It's very unfortunate. And it's also unfortunate that he
Yeah.
had to live through this period, because obviously never in a million years did he mean for this to be the outcome.
Oh, of course
I'm
not.
just very happy that he has a ride this year. Obviously his car is going to be that much more competitive. He has another year under his belt. He's partnering with a teammate that he's got a great relationship with, and I'm very excited to see what he can do this year. And I'm also excited because it wasn't always a certainty that he's going to be able to race in his home Grand Prix for the first time. So as much as
Yes.
last year was challenging and obviously the offseason was terrible for him, I think he's got a great season ahead of him, and hopefully he can start scoring points on a fairly consistent basis, as we saw he was capable of in parts of last season.
I'm going to cherry pick one of your comments there, and you said he's going to be able to race at home in front of his home fans. So we're talking about Montreal, which hasn't been on the calendar for the past couple of years for obvious reasons. The pandemic, that thing that we've been living through. Anyways, Franz Tost, who's the team principal at AlphaTauri, said that the 23 race calendar for this year is the absolute limit for Formula One. And that's something that we've debated and kind of tossed back and forth between the two of us, quite a bit over the past year or two, right? It's just like they've said that they want to go up to 25 races, and where we've been at for the past couple of years, except for the shortened year that we had, the 17 race season in 2020. at the height of COVID, which was a feat in of itself to get 17 races off under those circumstances. But the long-term goal was to get more and more races and get up to that. Basically, you're racing half the weekends out of the year. But I mean, 23 races. I mean, that's a real stretch as it is. I mean, where did we end up last year? Was it 21, 22? I've almost lost
22,
track now. It
22.
was 22. I mean, it seemed like a jam-packed season as it was. We're going to throw that extra race in, and perhaps there's still desire from somewhere up above that to get a couple more races in there. I can totally see where France is coming from, that 23 is the limit. I don't know how they could squeeze a couple extra races in, regardless if they keep it all geographically convenient and you have these double and triple headers. It seems, even though in a world where logistics and organization is an absolute art and a science in the way that Formula One is run, it's just everything has its limits. Everything has its breaking point, and who knows? But it's interesting nonetheless. Okay, moving on to the next one. Let's see. Let's go down the list here. Where do we go now? Oh, yeah, this is interesting, and this is a little bit surprising. But the Nürburgring and Hockenheim apparently can't meet the what they call the demands of of Formula One, and I find that very an interesting admission from two circuits in a country like Germany that has a very rich history, not just with automobiles, but motorsport and all levels of motorsport. I mean, and not just for drivers, but manufacturers and all aspects of it. That you have two facilities in Hockenheim and the Nürburgring. I've been to both. They're both fantastic tracks. They're better than they were in the day than I went. I mean, the Hockenheim is completely revamped, but this I found like a rather surprising and somewhat shocking admission.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge for these tracks is simply the competition, that we now live in a world where there might be 25 or 30 or 40 separate tracks around the world that are jostling to be put on the Formula One calendar. And not only do they have to compete with other tracks, which might have better grandstands and better amenities and better hospitality and might be in more sexy locale, you now compete with tracks that are willing to pay possibly tens of millions of dollars more to host a race. And you think that for a lot of these traditional Western countries, whether it's the UK or Belgium or the Netherlands or Canada or the US, really the kind of the peak entry fee or peak sanctioning fee that a lot of these tracks can afford to pay is about 20 to 25 million dollars US. And that's really just based on the tolerance that people have to pay for tickets, right? That if I'm
Mhm.
hosting an event at Silverstone or Austin or in Montreal or at Albert Park and in Melbourne, I'm only doing it because I want to be able to break even or make a small profit on the tickets that I sell. And I can only do that if the sanctioning fee is 20 or $25 million. The challenge now for somewhere like Hockenheim or Nürburgring, the amenities aren't as sexy as some of these newer tracks, and we have tracks going up all over the world. And furthermore, they've got to be able to sell tickets to cover the cost of the sanctioning fee. And then all of a sudden, you have somewhere like Qatar that's saying, hey, look, we'll build a brand new track, and here's $50 million to host a race. And if you're Nürburgring or Hockenheim, it suddenly just becomes immeasurably difficult to do that. So I think what's going to be really interesting to see over the next couple of years is the jostling amongst the existing traditional tracks and
Yeah.
other tracks that want to get onto the calendar that maybe aren't necessarily looking at breaking even or making money simply by hosting the event, but rather they use this as an opportunity to market and broadcast and commercialize their city or their country, because being on the Formula One calendar gets your country and your city in front of millions of eyeballs.
Yeah, well, we talked about it, well, it was several weeks ago now when those numbers were released for the race hosting fees. Where you look at some of these traditional tracks, like the European venues, their race hosting fees are in the low 20s. Yeah, I can't remember, what was Monaco even lower than 20 million per race? Was
Yeah,
it
historically they paid nothing.
Yeah.
Until recently, they paid nothing.
Yeah, and then I think the hosting fee that they have is like $15 million or something, or maybe
Yep.
20. But then you go and look at some of these newer venues, some of these newer racetracks. I think Azerbaijan is pushing like 60 million in race hosting fees. And it's just it's kind of crazy when you think about it, just the disparity between the traditional tracks and the newer ones. Like you say, some of them are obviously doing it for marketing and promotional reasons, right? But and I see a case for both, right? I can see why there would be tracks around the world and countries around the world that want to get onto the circus. They want to, like, and I say circus on purpose, they want to be part of that, and be part of the hype. But there's a place for both. There's a place for the old and the new. I mean, I just can't envision a Formula One that doesn't go to Silverstone, that doesn't go to Spa, that doesn't go to
Right.
to Monza, or even to other places like Brazil or Suzuka. Really really good tracks in places where we've had races literally forever. But as much as I love tracks like that, part of Formula One for me is ingenuity. It's new things, it's fresh ideas, and that includes racetracks and going to different places. And for me, that's just gotten better over the last couple of years, and that was due totally to the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic, and they were literally just trying to race and get out there and do something. And you had tracks like Imola Step Up that hadn't been on the circuit in years, and then you had like Mugello, pardon me, and then Portimao in Portugal, going to all these places that we'd never been before, we hadn't been in years. And I think that's really kind of injected a new energy into Formula One. Now we got Miami coming on this year, and it really kind of really underlined, or really, I think, explained something, because it sort of sticks in my mind now, the story that came out a couple of years ago when Chase Carey said that there was up to 40 contenders or interested parties globally that wanted to host a Formula One race. And I was just like, oh, yeah, really? Well, prove it. That's why I'm saying that to myself. I mean, slowly but surely, we've seen all this interest come around. But speaking of interest, Formula One confirmed that they had an audience of over 100 million plus for the season finale in Abu Dhabi last year. Peaked at 108 million viewers, or just shy thereof, 107.8 million TV viewers. That's a 29% increase compared to the 2020 race there. And there was a total accumulative TV audience of 1.55 billion people. And it was a 4% overall increase from 2020. And the average audience per Grand Prix was 70.3 million viewers. So that's interesting. So also there were several markets that really grew, with a year-on-year increase of 81% in the Netherlands. Obviously, the max effect is it's a real thing in Holland. And then 58% growth in the USA, which is as impressive as it is to see 81% growth and interest in Holland. That's a small country, 60 million people, still nothing to turn your nose up at. But 58% increase in the audience in a country of 350 million people like you have in the USA, that's a big number, and that's a lot of people that are now putting their eyes on Formula One.
What it also reinforces is how intense the interest in Formula One can be if you have a competitive championship, right? We did not see this level of interest in 15, 17, 18, 19, 20. But when you have a championship that can be so tight, so competitive, and go down to the wire, this is the outcome. This is the knock on effect, the byproduct. So when Formula One talks about creating competitive parity and re-engineering the formula of F1 to make passing more possible and to create more balance when it comes to competition and open up the championship. This is why, because it stimulates interest. If you have a single team or a single driver, no matter who that individual or who that team might be, it doesn't create a compelling TV product. So this is absolutely an immeasurable, I would say, byproduct of what we saw last year with the championship. And hopefully sport's going to be able to sustain this. And it's interesting as well, because I've been of the mind that over the course of the last couple of years, that the vast majority of the newfound interest in Formula One has been in the US for sure, but rather that what we were seeing was interest in Formula One not increasing, but rather recovering. That Formula One really saw a peak of interest in '07, '08, '09, '10, and
Mhm.
that the peak in the interest really died off during the Sebastian Vettel and much of the Lewis Hamilton period, simply because of the lack of competitive parity, and that interest that we saw globally last year wasn't necessarily new, but rather it was recovering from a decade long dip due to the lack of competitive parity. But now I think we're in a good place, and hopefully the new formula is going to continue to create this competitive parity that opens up the championship and gives more than one or two teams the opportunity to score race wins on any given Grand Prix weekend.
Well, we'll find out in a couple of weeks whether or not this is actually going to be a thing, or well, we can go down the rabbit hole of great ideas that Formula One had to increase parity that turned out to
I
be not that great in reality. But hopefully, that's not something that we're we're lamenting about a couple of weeks from now. Next story is going back to Williams. They've signed a deal with Duracell for a sponsorship deal, so that's a good. Kind of makes me wonder if we're going to see the Energizer Bunny in Formula One, or if the poor old Energizer Bunny is just going to live out his days on the Spokes Bunny retirement home. Talking about retirement homes here, Jacques Villeneuve is going to enter the Daytona 500, 14 years after the last time he tried it. So that's
He
the nice,
qualified. I don't know.
yeah,
Did you see that? He qualified. Incredible.
yeah, good for Jacques. Good for Jacques. I mean, yeah, I have told you the story how I ran literally. Well, I didn't literally run into Jacques Villeneuve, but in the interior of BC, there's a small resort town by the name of Joyeuse, and there's a resort there where there's a hotel, golf course, and yeah, we go and visit there every once in a while. Anyways, we were there. This is probably 8 or 9, 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer. But we were there, and we were just walking back to the car, and I see these two guys standing out to the by the front entrance to the hotel, and the one guy is a really really big, bulky, very well built guy. You can just tell that this guy is or was an athlete. And I take a look and I realize, oh, that's Gino Ojic. And if you're a fan of the Vancouver Canucks or NHL, Gino, former NHL player, he was a legend for the Vancouver. He's a cult figure with Canucks fans. Anyways, he's standing beside the somewhat diminutive, shorter fellow. And I take a look and I'm just like, well, if this isn't the original Odd Couple, because it takes a second to process, it's Gino Ojic talking to Jacques Villeneuve, 1997
That's
Formula One, one of the world
amazing.
champions. Anyways, Jacques was up there, and he did design. There's a private track nearby in Oliver, which is the next town up. I think it's called Area 27 or something like that. Anyways, Jacques was involved, and I don't know if he's an investor or shareholder in that resort. Anyways, that's kind of cool, but good for Jacques to qualify for the Daytona 500. And let's see here. So Formula Two driver Jack Doohan finished second in F2 last year. And it seems like he had a big, bright future with Red Bull, but apparently not. And this kind of goes back to something we've speculated about, just that pipeline within Red Bull and their whole driver academy system, because Jack has jumped ship and he's actually switched over to the Alpine Academy. What's your thought on that? On a hot young prospect like Jack Doohan?
I think that's a real great pickup for Alpine. What a great weekend for Alpine. You pick up
Yeah,
a
no
hot
kidding,
new
right?
talent to
Yeah,
stash away in your academy, and you pick up a fantastic new team principal in Otmar Szafnauer. I think
yeah.
this is a great pickup. It probably also speaks to the glut of talent in the Red Bull Academy, which is possibly one of the richest in all of professional motorsport. But I think it's a really great pickup for Alpine.
Yeah, and then also talking about their rivals down the pit lane. Mercedes has announced 7 drivers that will be part of its junior program in 2022. This includes Frederica Vesti and Luna Fluxa, and Flux is the first female driver to be admitted to that Mercedes program. So
Awesome.
that's exciting and great to see as well. And I mean, especially in a top tier, top notch program like Mercedes. So it's exciting. And in this day and age, I mean, the fact that we literally have so much information literally right at our fingertips on our phones, it's so much easier to get to follow these other racing series and get to know some of these drivers. I mean, it's not really all that long ago that if you weren't in Formula One and directly in one of these teams as say a reserve driver, it's like nobody had no idea who you were. But I mean, it's more exciting now that we can see these young drivers coming along and filtering into some of these different teams. So really, really
Luna, by the way, and I
yeah,
went down the rabbit hole of Googling and learning all about her, is apparently a monster talent. And she comes from Spain, which is a
yep,
country that does a phenomenal job of developing world-class MotoGP riders. They've
sure, yep,
obviously developed some really strong Formula One drivers, Fernando Alonso being one of them, Carlos
yep.
Sainz being another. But she, by all accounts, is an absolute superstar. So somebody to look to in the course of the next couple of years as she concludes her karting championship and starts to enter the lower formulas.
Yeah, that's it's really, really cool to see, and we'll have to take a look at some of these. I mean, we should start delving into some of these other drivers that are starting to break into the fringes of Formula one way or another. So before we wrap it up, just want to give a shout out to everybody in the live stream: Steve, Rocky, Andy. Charlie's in there. Connie was in there as well. Great to see everybody showing up. And you were shaming Charlie for showing up late, and then Charlie making the profound comment that time is nothing but a construct. It's like I don't even know what to do with that. It's way too late in the evening to even break into some sort of difficult discussion like that. So I'm just going to say that you tried to shame Charlie, and he shut you down, man. So,
Oh,
anyways,
he's a smart kid. What can I say? And Micah also joined the chat. So
oh,
to
cool,
everybody tonight that joined the Spaces chat, thank
awesome,
you. We had a really great turnout, and as always, it was inclusive, fun, light, and respectful. I think that's one of the
nice,
things that makes those chats so great. And to everybody that joined the live stream tonight, thank you. This is something we want to start promoting, and we want to do some more visual things to make the live stream a little bit more stimulating and a little bit more professional. So we've got some ideas. We're also going to experiment one week with doing a live stream earlier in the evening to help make it a little bit more accessible to those of you in the East. Probably not something we can do on a kind of a long-term basis, but we want to kind of give it a try just to see what
sure.
that would do. But yeah, once again, thank you to everybody that joined us. We are now just because I believe, thanks to Peter, who let us know during the spaces tonight that the Mercedes launch is at, I believe, 1 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just 2 hours and 15 minutes away from now, we'll get our first looks
Well,
at the newest
hey,
Mercedes
you
competitor.
know what? You and I can fill up 2 hours, no problem. So, you just
Well,
take for a couple minutes. I'll go throw on a pot of coffee here. Let's just ride this thing out. No, I'm just kidding. We wouldn't subject everybody to that, but I'm sure somebody would probably. Well, actually, Charlie just said in live chat that he's going to stay up for the Mercedes launch. So there you go. At least one person is going to stay up for it, and considering it's almost 11 p.m. here on the West Coast, I think I'll probably stay up after I get this thing processed and posted just to check it out for myself. So, Connie's going to stay up and watch it as well. So there's no lack of interest for the Mercedes launch in the community. So, we should watch out if we threaten to go for another 2 hours. They might expect it. So let Mark, let's get out while the going's good. So,
1 a.m. Spaces
anyways,
time. I'm calling it now.
there you there you go. Don't do it because that will become a thing as well. So,
Oh,
anyways,
geez.
guys, thank you so much for joining in tonight. Thank you so much for either joining us on the live chat or the live stream, I should say. Join us in Spaces, or if you're listening on the podcast or on YouTube, we appreciate the support and enjoy interacting with one and all of you. So that's it. On behalf of myself and Mr. Hamilton, thank you for your time this week. Enjoy your weekend. If you want to get in touch, by all means, send us an email, scooteryf1pod@gmail.com. Mailbag's been a little bit quiet lately, but that'll pick up pretty quick. And then also join us on Twitter @ScooteryF1pod. And that's it. That's a wrap. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Talk to you guys again